Welcome back, Algebra 2. On our last lesson, we learned how to do long division. There are times when you have to do long division, but there is an easier method that you can use at other times. So any time that you are dividing by a linear binomial, in other words, x plus or minus a number, x plus or minus a number, okay, you can actually divide using something called synthetic division. So our first step in using synthetic division is that we have to solve for x. So we have to get the x completely by itself. So here I have x plus 2 equals 0, and I'm going to solve that. So I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides, and I get x equals -2. So now -2 is what I'm going to be dividing by. So I'm going to put it right here, and I'm going to draw a little box around it like that. My next step is to double check to make sure I'm not missing any degrees here. So I have a second, I have a first, and I have a 0. If I'm missing degrees, I have to use a filler. I have to use a 0 in there. So let's go ahead now. And I'm going to take these coefficients and I'm just going to rewrite them to my coefficient 7 and my coefficient 9. My process for synthetic division, I always bring that first coefficient straight down. Now I'm going to multiply. So I'm going to say -2 times 2, and I'm going to put that answer right here. So that's a -4. Now I'm going to add these two numbers. So 7 take away 4 is 3. Now I'm going to just repeat the process. So -2 times 3 is -6. And I'm going to add these two numbers and I get 3. So now I am done with my division because there's nothing else over here to add or subtract from. So this last number becomes my remainder. And these two numbers right here become my leftover polynomial. So let's take a look at what actually happened when we divided. So we started here with an x squared, and we started here with an x and with just a constant. So when we divided, this variable became an x, and this variable became our constant, and this became our remainder. So every time we divide, this first term, whatever we start with, loses a degree. So it started as an x squared, so in our answer, it's going to be an x. So our answer is 2x plus, this was a 7x, now it's going to be just a 3, and our remainder is 3. So that's going to be plus 3 over, and now I have to go back to my original binomial, my linear binomial up here, and it's over x plus 2. And I'm done. Once again, a much easier method, but there are times when we have to use long division. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at the next one. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this x plus 1/2 equals 0, and I'm going to solve it. So I'm going to subtract 1/2 from both sides, and I get x equals -1/2. That's what I'm going to divide by. And it's going to go in a little box right there. Now I'm going to make sure that I'm not missing any degrees here. There's a squared, there's a first, there's a 0. So now I'm going to bring these coefficients and write them down. So I'm going to write my 4 down. I'm going to write my -12 down, and I'm going to write my +9 down. My first step is always to bring my first coefficient straight down. So now that I've brought down my 4, I'm going to multiply. So -1/2 times 4 is -2. So 1/2 of 4 is 2, and it's a negative. Now I'm going to add my two numbers right here. So -12 minus 2 is -14. Now I'm going to do it all over again. -1/2 times -14. So 1/2 of 14 is 7. These are both negative, so it's going to be a positive 7. I'm going to add these two numbers right here, and I'm going to get 16. So this last number is my remainder. So I started out with a 4x squared, so that means this 4 is just going to be a 4x, which means I started out with a 12x, which means this is going to be a minus 14, positive 16 over my x plus 1/2. Go on ahead and try this third problem. Pause the video, try it, and then come back and see if you got the same thing as me. Okay, I hope you all tried it and you were successful, which we're about to see. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this x plus 3 and I'm going to solve for x. So I get x equals -3. So -3 is what I'm dividing by. Now I'm going to check to make sure I'm not missing any exponents here. I'm not, so I'm going to go on ahead and bring down my coefficients. So it's 6, -5, and -6. My first coefficient is always brought straight down. And now I'm going to start my multiplication. So -3 times 6 is -18. And you don't have to draw these arrows. I just do that to kind of get you guys into what I'm doing. And to remind you. Now I'm going to add -5 and -18. And I get -23. Now I'm going to multiply again. -3 times -23 is 69. And I'm going to add -6 and 69 to get 63. That's my remainder. I started out with a 6x squared, so this is going to be a 6x. My 5 was an x, so this is going to be minus just 23. Positive 63 over x plus 3. So that's synthetic division. Now we're going to add a few more things onto this lesson because synthetic division is generally a whole lot easier for students to understand than that long division that we did yesterday. So for synthetic division, and the reason we use synthetic division is for a couple of reasons. So our first reason is called the remainder theorem. So the remainder theorem says that if a polynomial function p of x, so that's our function here, x to the third minus 4x squared plus 5x plus 1, is divided by x minus a. So it's divided by x minus 3, which means once we solve that, we get x equals 3, so that's what we're dividing by. Then the remainder r is p of a. All right, so let's take a look at this. So if I plug 3 into this function right here, this polynomial, I get 3 to the third power minus 4 times 3 squared plus 5 times 3 plus 1. And I work that all out. I'm going to get p of 3 equals 7. When I divide by this number right here, which is the same as x minus 3, so this would be a factor, and this would be a number or a value of x. When I divide by that value of x, I get a remainder that's the same as if I had plugged that 3 in. So my remainder theorem says that I can divide and find the value of a graph, so my y value when x equals 3. Okay, so let's go on ahead and let's do that problem over here. So we're going to evaluate. Okay, so it says evaluate p of x equals 2x to the third minus 7x squared minus 4 when x equals 3. Okay, so normally we would say, okay, well, p of 3 equals 2 times 3 to the third power minus 7 times 3 squared minus 4. 3 to the third is 27. 27 times 2 is 54. minus 3 squared is 9. 9 times 7 is 63, minus 4. And I get, it looks like negative 13. Hey, if I did my math right. But now let's double check this and let's evaluate it using our division. Okay, so now we're going to take 3, and that's what we're dividing by. We have to check and make sure we're not missing any terms here. We're missing an x term, so we're going to need to plug a 0x in. Okay, so I'm going to bring down my coefficients to negative 7. Don't forget that x term, which is 0, and negative 4. Bring my 2 down. 3 times 2 is 6. Negative 7 plus 6 is negative 1. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. 0 minus 3 is, negative 3. And 3 times negative 3 is negative 9, which gives us negative 13. So you noticed either way, I got the same answer right there. Okay, so number one, it's a good way to check your math to see if you plug something in right. Okay, but we use division for a lot of things. So being able to do several things in one step really helps. Okay, so we're going to evaluate now using division, and that's called the remainder theorem, because the remainder is the y value at that x value. Now let's talk about the factor theorem. So the factor theorem says that for any polynomial, okay, so we're calling it p of x, x minus a, in other words, whatever we divide by, is a factor if and only if, that's a biconditional statement, that means it has to be true both ways, if when we divide, we get a 0. In other words, our remainder has to be 0. Okay, so we're going to do everything we've done exactly the same. And now we're just checking to see if the binomial is a factor. If it is a factor, then we have to know that it is a 0 for the remainder. Okay, so let's go on ahead and let's do some division here. So the first thing I'm going to check for, make sure that this is not missing any terms. So now I have x minus 3, so I'm going to set that equal to 0. And I'm going to solve. I prefer to use synthetic division whenever possible. So that's going to be a 3 is what I'm dividing by. So now I have a coefficient of 1, 2, and negative 3. Bring my 1 down. 3 times 1 is 3. 2 times 3 is 5. 3 times 5 is 15. And that gives me 15 take away 3 is 12. So all I'm looking at right now is my remainder. My remainder is 12, so that is not 0, which means that x minus 3 is not a factor. So that means that x equals 3 is not a root. In other words, this graph does not touch the x-axis at 3. And if I go into my calculator and I actually calculate and graph this thing, see, I get x squared plus 2x minus 3. And I'm going to graph it. You can see that it does not touch my x-axis at x equals 3. It touches at x equals 1 and x equals negative 3. So let's go on ahead and let's try the second one. So first thing, I'm going to set this equal to 0 and solve. So subtract 4 from both sides. I don't need that x down there. And so I get x equals negative 4. Okay, so I'm dividing by negative 4. So now I'm going to go on ahead and check to make sure I'm not missing any degrees. I am missing a 0x squared, missing an x squared term. but that's it. So I'm going to bring my coefficients down. That's a 2, 8, 0, 2, and 8. My 2 comes down. -4 times 2 is -8. That's 0. -4 times 0 is 0. That's 0. -4 times 0 is 0. That's 2. -4 times 2 is -8, and that's 0. So all I'm looking at right now is my remainder. So my remainder is 0. That means that x plus 4 is a factor. So in factored form, I could write that if I multiply x plus 4 times what I got here, so that's a 2x to the third plus 2, I will wind up with this polynomial. So let's go on ahead and try this last one. So first thing, I'm going to take my x plus 2 and set it equal to 0 and solve. So subtract 2 from both sides, and I get x equals -2. So I'm going to divide by -2. I need to check to make sure I'm not missing any terms here. I'm not. So I'm going to bring my coefficients down. I have a 4, a -2, and a 5. Bring down my first coefficient. -2 times 4 is -8. That's going to be a -10. -2 times -10 is +20. That's a 25. Okay. That remainder is not 0, which means that x plus 2 is not a factor, which also means that x does not equal -2. So that is it for 3.4b. As always, please come see us and ask for help if you need help, and have a great evening.